Okay, welcome to today's share. It is called The Majesty of the Matriarchs, the Prophecy and Power. So when Hashem created human beings, he endowed each gender with both feminine and masculine traits. The male trait is the one that is expansive. It's ideas, it's knowledge, it's mindset, it's polymorphous. The feminine trait takes the essence of the idea, the knowledge, and the philosophy or mindset, shrinks it into a concept of its own, and individualizes and specifies what it is, making it into an action rather than just an amorphous thought. So the feminine trait nurtures concepts and traits and builds them so that they're no longer diverse, but become defined, matured, and thought out actions according to the Rambam. In other words, ideas that lacked structure and frame, composition, organization, are incubated, they're configured, they're shaped, they're built, they're nurtured, and they become solidly thought out philosophies, values, beliefs, and they transform into thought processes that become a course of action. Hence, we have male and female, separate and together in one frame and one gender. So everyone has some bits of the masculine as well as some bits of the feminine. The male traits address how something is made, what's needed to replicate the system, how to find a new twist in that material, that tangible or that esoteric item. The preponderance of feminine traits that's generally found in women include the desire to know what it feels like, how it came about, what qualities and thoughts, ideas, philosophies bring forward, and how it's going to impact on the future and what to do about it. And of course, there's a healthy mixture of both in both genders, and both are needed to amalgamate what becomes the whole human being. Indeed, men and women serve two very different, very necessary functions. So before exploring the matriarchs, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and the leading role they play in forming our nation, we have to disabuse ourselves of one very crucial fact. The Torah, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, is not sexist. Women are not considered the weaker gender, or in any way less than the male gender. Hashem told Abraham in a prophecy about Ishmael, Kol asher tomar elecha Sarah shma b'kola. Everything that Sarah tells you, listen b'kola, to her voice. The Medrash says that from here we learn Sarah was a greater prophetess than Abraham. Kola means not her voice per se, but her voice because it is nevuah, because her voice is prophecy. So when Sarah demanded that Abraham banish Hagar and Ishmael from the household, it wasn't out of pettiness, and it wasn't out of jealousy that she told Abraham to banish them, but it was in preparation for preserving the spiritual nature of Yitzchak, in preparation for his being the pivotal forefather that he was to become. Hashem says, listen to everything Sarah tells you. And the translation of Bikola is the prophecy. A further proof of the Torah's recognition of women as opposed to the non-Jewish definition as women is the source of femininity, which is the womb. The Latin word for womb is hystra, from which we get the word hysteria. The Hebrew word for womb is rechem, from which we get the word rachmanut, compassion. Now who's sexist? Whenever we talk about emulating Hashem, the first words that come to mind are Mahu rachum, avatarachum. Just as he is compassionate, so you too must be compassionate. That's our very first. How does Hashem want to be defined? As rachum, compassionate, rechem, like a woman. The feminine compassion is the foremost trait that we should try to replicate. Now, we learn that Sarai, translation of the word Sarah, Sarai is my princess, was named Yiska at birth. She and her sister Milka, some Chazal say, were twins. And they were born obviously at the same time, from the same father. Why was she called Yiska? Because from the very start, we see that she was called Yiska because she was saturated with Hashem's presence. Everybody that saw her saw this ethereality about her. And it was not just that she was Yiska, everyone who saw her beauty. What was that beauty? That beauty was the Shekhinah, the presence of Hashem that lived within her. So that after the Brit Bein HaBetarim, the covenant between the parts, the treaty between Hashem and Avraham Avinu, where Hashem said, you are going to be the father of Hamon Goyim, the father of many nations, and which nation in particular? Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people. Who is his wife? His wife now has to be Sarah. She cannot be just your princess. She is now the world's princess. So when the Malachim, the messengers who brought Abraham and Sarah the news that they would be parents, came to visit Abraham, what did they say before telling Abraham about the impending birth of a child? Ayeh Sarah Ishtecha. The word Ayeh doesn't mean physically, where is Sarah, your wife? Sarah was not tied to the kitchen by her apron strings. Yes, she was ba'ohel, v'hinei Sarah ba'ohel. Sarah was in the tent. What is the most the most special place that Moshe Rabbeinu went to in order to receive nevuah, prophecy? Ba'ohel, the tent. Sarah was in the tent, meaning Sarah was communicating with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with Hashem, through her nevuah, through her prophecy. So we see that Sarah Imenu was a very great prophet, and she was the one who stood behind and alongside of Avraham Avinu, of Avraham, when she had her prophecies, and when he went to influence the men, Sarah went out and influenced the women. Now, when Abraham gave Eliezer the mission to find a wife for this child that they both had, she at 99 years old, he at 90 years old, he at 100 years old. Avraham Avinu intimated to Eliezer, his servant, you must go to Haran, which is where Lavan lived. Lavan was the grandson of Terach, the son of Bethuel, and you must find a wife for Yitzchak from amongst Lavan's children, Bethuel's children. And so he had to know when Eliezer asked Rivka, who is she? She actually said to him, I am Milca's daughter, and Milca was the daughter of Haran. In other words, Milca was not born to a concubine, the Medrash tells us. Milca was born in direct descendancy from Terach to Haran to Bethuel, who married Milca, so that the family is the exact family that Eliezer was looking for, and the exact family that Abraham wanted his son to be associated with. Now, let's go back to Sarah for a minute again. Sarah's high level of Kedusha extended to her home as well as outside of her home. The Medrash tells us that when Sarah was nifter, when Sarah died, the door to her tent that was usually wide open narrowed. Her candles that remained alight from Shabbos to Shabbos were extinguished. Her bread that was fresh from one Shabbos to the next, and the bread is of course symbolic of the lechem hapanim, the showbread that was baked in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, on a weekly basis. That showbread, like Sarah's showbread, like Sarah's bread, remained fresh from week to week. And the cloud of the Shekhinah that hovered over the tent when Sarah was alive disappeared until Yitzchak married Rivka. So when Yitzchak saw that Rivka followed in the footsteps of his mother, he was ready to marry her. The pasuk tells us he brought her into the tent, meaning that he found the same circumstances that came to the tent, the ohel, that very special meeting place where the Shekhinah always resided. That was the place of Sarah and of Rivka. Rivka did not have the prophecy that Sarah had, but she had that Yirat Hashem, that fear of Hashem, and she knew where to go in order to receive any messages from Hashem if she needed it, and she wasn't shy to do so. Rivka was not only a kind person, and we see that she was a person that was outer directed chesed. We have three different midot, three different traits that run within the avot and the imahot, the patriarchs and the matriarchs. Abraham's trait was chesed. Chesed doesn't mean something that I do for you. Chesed is opening myself up so that you become, I include you into my orbit, and you are a part of me, and I am a part of you. That is true chesed. That is the chesed that Abraham practiced, and the gevura that we have. Gevura doesn't mean physical strength. Gevura means chachma, wisdom. The wisdom that Sarah had encompassed that chesed of Abraham. What did she do with it? Abraham, the chesed that Abraham had, is far-flung. It's out there. It needs to be garnered in. When it's garnered in, that is gevura, that is chachma. That is what Sarah was able to do. She was able to bring that chachma in and to activate it. Gevura is action. She was able to take that chesed, that if you didn't deserve the chesed, you didn't get the chesed. If you didn't deserve the inclusivity, then you were not included. Hagar, who was the concubine that Sarah gave to Abraham, Hagar was not worthy of Abraham at all times. And in those times when she wasn't worthy, Sarah had no compunctions but to say, you must leave. If you cannot buckle down to the standards of this household, then you do not belong here. Paro did not give Hagar to Abraham as a servant. Paro gave Hagar to Sarah as a servant. And therefore, Sarah was the one who could say to Abraham, she needs to leave because she has too much avodah zarah, too much idol worship within her. So therefore, when Hagar was chased out of Abraham's household, and the Malach said to her, you will have a son. That son will be Ishmael. Does not mean that Hashem will hear him. It means that this son who will be born to you is going to be the tool that brings prayer, davening, tefillah from the Jewish nation on high to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of your oppression of that nation. And therefore, when Klal Yisrael cries out to Hashem, Yishma Kel, Hashem will listen to that davening. This is from Reb Moshe Shapiro. So when Sarah chased Ishmael and Hagar away the second time, her nevuah, her prophecy told her, don't give them supplies that are going to last forever. Give them enough to go from one station to the other, because if you give them too much, they will squander it and they will go off the beaten track, which is what they did. Because the pasuk tells us that they dawdled meaning that Hagar sought avodah zarah, idol worship, and it was then that they ran out of food and drink, and it was then that Ishmael cried out to Hashem. So just as Ishmael cried out to Hashem, so too, when the Jewish people is in trouble, what do? We cry out to Hashem with tefillah. What is tefillah? Tefillah is bringing judgment upon ourselves. If one sins another against one another, a judge will judge him. And if he does the wrong thing that impacts Hashem, who is going to judge him? So what do? When we say tefillah, which is a reflexive, we bring judgment upon ourselves. When Hashem hears that judgment that we bring, that we admit that we've done something wrong, Yishma Kel, Hashem will listen. This was why Ishmael was named Yishmael, not for his sake, as much as for the sake of Klal Yisrael. And it came through the nevuah, the prophecy of Sarah. So with Rivka had this midah, this trait of chesed, outer directed inclusivity, even towards animals. Let me feed your animals, and then when they're finished, I will give you. The animals need me to include them in my system. Therefore, first I will give them because they're helpless, and then I will give you. And when Eliezer stood at that well and saw this chesed, and then saw later, well, he didn't see the Gevurah, but Rivka then showed her gevura in a different way. She had the combination of the chesed, the inclusivity, and the gevura, and the chokhmah, the wisdom that brings to action. And these two combinations were the combination of Abraham and Sarah, and Rivka and Yitzchak. So Rivka was not just another pretty face, but from the time that she married Yitzchak, she negotiated a deal with him that every day she would receive one animal from his flock of sheep and goats. Now, if you do the math, even if it were only 12 years from the time that she married Yitzchak, she had over 4,000 heads of cattle. And if it was later, if they were 20 years old by the time Esav went off the beaten track, then she had over 8,000 heads of cattle. She was a wealthy woman. She had the sechel, she had the gevura, she had the ability to think of what she needed, how she needed to be both dependent and independent of her husband, of Yitzchak. Now, the problem that Rivka faced was a problem very, very much like that of her mother-in-law, Sarah. Both she and Yitzchak were barren. And Yitzchak and Rivka stood and brought judgment upon themselves, tefillah, daven to Hashem for progeny, and the pasuk tells us that Hashem answered Yitzchak's prayer. Why Yitzchak? Yitzchak was a tzaddik ben tzaddik. Yitzchak was a righteous person who was raised in a righteous household. And since he was also barren, he was answered first. And then as a result of being answered, Rivka's prayers were also answered. So although in her own right, Rivka was a tzaddiket, a very, very righteous woman, there are times when amassed merit trumps self-merit. And this was one of those times. But she was held in very high esteem because, as we will see, Hashem gives Rivka the insight that she needed to deal with the most difficult of all situations that a person can have. She knew that there was something entirely unnatural going on within her system. Both Yitzchak and Rivka were strong, they were steadfast. Yitzchak spent his time digging wells. What does that mean, digging wells? You have to look further. What is a well? A well is that container that brings water to the surface. The deeper dimensions of this fact tell us that Yitzchak digging wells means digging into the depths of understanding of Hashem. How do we come to that? When we speak of a be'er, when we speak of a wellspring of water, in spiritual terms, water is Torah. Water is a staple without which we cannot exist. Not human beings, not animals, not minerals, not earth. Nothing can exist without water. The universe cannot exist without water. The Medrash tells us, the deeper meaning tells us that Hashem, Histakel b'Torah bara alma, looked into Torah and created the world. What does that mean? The Torah is the world's blueprint. Hashem first created this blueprint. Ke'ilu, it's as though this is our understanding, that this is what he wanted the world to look like. And you do that by having a blueprint. The Torah was the blueprint that Hashem created. And the Torah was the blueprint that perpetuated everything that Yitzchak did, that his father had begun with that relationship, that very special relationship with Hashem, the thirst that needs water, to dig more deeply into the spiritual concepts that keep the world going. The ideal situation would have been that when Rivka fell pregnant, and she fell pregnant with twins, that both of them would help to carry out the intentions that Hashem wished for the world. However, we can't always have the ideal situation playing out in the way that we want, because this is a world of Bechira Chofshit, of the freedom of choice. We can either do what is right and good, or we can go off that path and break with what we know we should be doing and say, I can do that. My ego tells me that I can do whatever I set out to do. I don't need Hashem, chas v'shalom. That is the brokenness of moving off the path of Torah, because Ra is not necessarily bad, as is translated, but is broken. Brokenness can be fixed. When Rivka felt, and the pasuk says, "Vayitrotzetzu habanim b'kirba," that the children struggled inside of her. She knew that there was something, that the ideal plan was just not working within her, and it wasn't going to work. What did she do? Did she go to Yitzchak? No. She went to the greatest Torah minds of the generation, not to say that Yitzchak wasn't, but totally divorced from personal knowledge. She went to Shem and Aver. The Shem who had survived the flood, and Aver, his grandson, who took after him and who then were prophets in Nevi'im in the world. And she went to them and she said, do I have a schizophrenic child? Or what do I have within me? And of course they told her. The Torah gives us an idea of the strength and the action that Rivka had to take. Like her mother-in-law, Sarah Imenu, she was childless. Hashem answered Yitzchak's prayer, and now she was disturbed by the answer of the prayer. And she spoke to Shem and Aver, who explained the prophecy that they had to her. That number one, a prophecy is often directed to a particular person or nation in a particular direction. It's not out there for the world to know. And so she was told, the nevuah that we're giving you, this is from Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, the nevuah that I'm now going to give you, the prophecy I'm now going to give you, is not to be shared with Yitzchak. Yitzchak had to be able to form a relationship with Esav that was very different. And so she was not to tell him that one was going to go in the way of Hashem and the other was going to experience the brokenness of thinking that he, as an egoist, could do whatever Hashem could do. She understood this, and she had to, again, love both children in the equal way that you have to, but educate them in the manner that each one needed, even though Esav and Yaakov sat in the same Beit Midrash. In other words, they were taught the same principles, but each one heard, understood, and acted on those principles in a different way. Esav took that letarbut ra and took it in a broken manner in which he corrupted what he was learning, and Yaakov took it and formed emet, truth, out of it. Whenever you have a 3-stranded rope, it is much sturdier than any other. If you have something that is 2-legged, if one leg breaks, you have, let's say it's a chair. If one leg breaks, there's no chair. If you have a 4-legged table and one breaks, you get unsteadiness. If you have 3 legs and you place them properly, then that is the sturdiest of all the strengths that you can get. When the chesed of Avraham, the inclusivity of Avraham, combined with the gevura, that's the chokhmah, combined with the gevura, the inner discipline and the action of Yitzchak, it brought emet. Emet is known as the steadfast commitment of a Yaakov. Whatever happened to Yaakov, whatever he experienced through the commitment of emet, using the chesed and the gevura, the outer directed chesed, the inner directed self-discipline, the chokhmah, the knowledge and the action, and combined it into an action that is in its way the most steadfast. So she knew that each of these sons had something that was very special, but she could not share this with Yitzchak because he had to find the specialness of each of the children within. So that inner directedness, that inner self-discipline might have been a hindrance to his relationship with Esav. Instead, we see him reaching out to Esav, using his inner discipline to try and continue to bring Esav into the fold. What did that mean for Yaakov? It meant for Yaakov that Yaakov was going to have to find his way in the world in a manner that was very different. And Rivka supported both her sons in whatever way she could. With Yaakov, she knew that he had to have the bracha, and he had to have the unbounded bracha, rather than the bracha that was shared between them. In a perfect world, how would Esav and Yaakov have interfaced with one another? Esav would have been the business brain. He would have been the one that goes out and then that drums up gets the loans from people, that sees to it that the right brains are put into the project that's at hand, while Yaakov would have just sat and learned Torah and would not have had to busy himself with all the extraneous matters of this world. But that wasn't to be. That wasn't the way that Esav manifested in this world. Instead, Esav manifested with the ra'u'ah, the brokenness of Ra, the brokenness of negativity, the brokenness of egoism. That when he came back from the field, where he had in one day transgressed 3 major wrongdoings, he was guilty of murder, he was guilty of gezel, and he was geneva, of stealing, and he was guilty of idolatry. All three of these are principles that cannot be broken, and he broke them all. So that he came back and he said to Yaakov, it was on the day of Abraham's funeral, and he said to Yaakov, I'm starving. Just give me these adashim, give me these beans, because if not, I'm going to die. What is he saying over there? If not, I'm going to die. He's, on the one hand, he's saying, I haven't had anything to eat or drink all day, so you have to give me whatever you can give me right now or I'm going to die. But that's not what he was saying. He's saying, I've made myself a Baal Mavet. I've made sure that the edict is out against me, that I'm not going to survive because I have transgressed these three major transgressions, and therefore I'm worthy of that death penalty. So what do I need the Bechorah for? Why would I need a birthright when I'm on the verge of death? I did everything that I could that was a rebellion against Hashem. You think he didn't know about Hashem? Of course he knew about Hashem. And it was Yaakov who said, you know, from the very beginning, I've said to you, I want the Bechorah. Now, sign on the dotted line. Because if I give you these adashim, if I give you this food, in other words, if I give you what you want to just carry on in your way, you know what? You can still do teshuvah. You can still come back. But I want that Bechorah. I want that closeness to Hashem. I want to be the one who ushers the Jewish people into this world. And Esav said, I don't care about it. You can have it. Now, Yitzchak did not know about this treaty between the two of them. He didn't realize, he didn't know, and he wasn't given the nevuah. He wasn't given the insight for a specific reason. Because then Hashem placed Rivka in a place where she could hear the request. Go out, my son. You know my favorite dish. Go and shecht a deer for me. Esav was such an expert marksman that his arrow could slaughter an animal in the exactly correct way to make it a kosher animal. And so when Esav went out to hunt that day, it was with the idea that I'm going to bring him closer. And because I'm not sure when I'm going to die, I'm going to give the Bechorah. I'm going to give the bracha of the Bechorah. I know, Yitzchak knew that Esav wasn't worthy of the entire Bechorah. He knew that. But he wanted to bring Esav as close as he possibly could. Rivka, knowing that with her knowledge, the gevura that she had, an action is needed. And that's why she called to Yaakov and she said to him, I know how to make that dish. I will take one of the animals from my own flock, the one that's given to me once a day. In all the years that we've been married, I have received one animal. I will take from my flock. We slaughter it, and I will prepare it so that there's no difference in the taste of venison and in the taste of this gedi izin, this lamb. And Yaakov, of course, being the ish emet, being the person who says, 1 second, I have to know that what I'm doing is a steadfast commitment to the way I am supposed to be. And therefore, how can I go to the very edges of emet, of that steadfastness, and answer Yitzchak's questions? But Rivka knew that Yaakov would be able to do this, and she pushed him towards it because it was important and because it was necessary for Klal Yisrael. And she knew that she had to say to Yaakov, now you have to go to my brother Lavan after you leave here. Of course, I'm skipping a lot in between because we're concentrating on the matriarchs. You have to go to my brother Lavan. She knew that Lavan had two daughters. And she knew that one daughter was slated for Esav and one would be slated for Yaakov. And she knew that these two daughters had the traits that were needed to encompass Klal Yisrael, the Jewish nation as a whole. So therefore, when Yaakov went to find Lavan and to go and make himself a part of Lavan's family through marriage, he knew that he was going to marry Rachel. Vayehav Avram et Rachel. Yaakov et Rachel. Yaakov loved her. Loving is giving. Loving doesn't mean that the romantic love that we think of. He knew, Vayehav, he knew that he had to give to her in the intimacy of marriage the way that he's supposed to. But what did Lavan do? Lavan took Leah and he said to Leah, you have to be there under that veil instead of Rachel. Rachel was heartbroken. But Rachel is that force, that gevura of the galut, of the exile that we as a Jewish people need. That's Rachel. At the last minute, Rachel went to her sister Leah and gave her the signs that she and Yaakov had decided on, so that her sister would not be mortified by not knowing the passwords. And it hurt her, and it angered her, and she held that anger within her. Leah, by the same token, was relieved because now she was the wife of Yaakov, and she could give Yaakov what she had within her. And she had an inclusivity. She had a chesed, and she stood by what she wanted and needed. So with each child, she said, maybe now Yaakov is going to be able to come closer to me as a person. Leah is the geula. Leah, and this is Moshe Shapiro again, Leah is the geula. Leah is the one who the Mashiach ben David comes from. Who are Leah's children? Reuven. Hashem is going to see that you favor me, and my husband will be happy with me. Shimon. Hashem heard my voice. Hashem heard my request. Maybe now Yaakov is going to come closer to me. Levi, I've accompanied Levi and brought my husband closer. Yehuda, Hapam Odel Hashem. This child I have had selflessly. I am just going to thank Hashem for Hashem giving me, because Hashem gives. Yehuda is the progenitor of all of Malchut, of all of royalty. Who is Yosef? Yosef is that power in the Geula that keeps Klal Yisrael as an adhesive nation, keeps Klal Yisrael together through his chokhmah and bina, his wisdom, and building on that wisdom so that it comes to the action. That's what we need in Galus. In Galus, we need that action because that's what's bringing us closer to Hashem. In the Geula, what we're going to need is that chesed, that the whole world is inclusive in this ingathering, that it's the ideal. It's what we've prayed for all along. We've prayed that Hashem should see us, should hear us, should accompany us. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Yehuda is the one that brings us closer. Yehuda is the one that brings us royalty, the royalty that is going to stand us in good stead for all our lives. Who was David? David HaMelech was the David of Tefillah. David HaMelech was the one that as soon as that something happened that was untoward, he immediately said, Chatati. Okay, I accept it. We see this the first time when Abigail, another very powerful Nevi'ah, another very powerful prophetess, comes to David HaMelech when David is planning a war against her husband, her wicked husband, Naval HaKamerli, who owed David and his men so much because they made his borders that were along the lines of the border of Eretz Yisrael, made them safe. The marauding nations of the world who would have come and stolen his sheep and cattle didn't come because of David. And when David's men went to Naval and they said to Naval, and Abigail wasn't there at the time, or she would have taken care of it because that was part of her, what she demanded for her ketubah from Naval, because she had access to every food that was prepared in the household. That was hers to do with as she pleased. And she would have given David's messengers what they needed, but she wasn't there. And Naval said, who are you? I'm not loyal to you. I'm loyal to Shaul. And in fact, I should report you to Shaul and you should be killed. And so when David left, he had already been the Mashiach Hashem. He had already been anointed. He had already been coronated by Shmuel. He said, I'm the king. But Ein Shnei Malachim, you cannot have two kings under in one kingdom. It doesn't work. And Abigail got on her mount, on her donkey, and rode to get to David before he could do anything, and saved David twice. Once by his misreckoning of who he was, where she explained to him, you're not the king until you're anointed in public. And number two, that if you had killed Naval and it was not your business to kill him, Hashem would never have forgiven you. So you would never have become king. And so for this, Hapam Odeh Hashem. Yehuda is that person, that trait of, I can see where I've gone wrong and I can ask for forgiveness and I can mend my ways. At the end of being able to do that, then you can have a Shlomo. Shlomo is the time when all of the nations of the world come together, recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, recognizing Hashem, recognizing that Hashem is the Melech al Kol Haaretz, the king, the universal king. So that is the time of Mashiach. When Leah thought that she was going to have to marry Esav, she did not think that she would have a part later in Klal Yisrael. But when Yaakov took the Bechorah, when he took the birthright, he combined the Esav and Yaakov. The Esav was not the brokenness of Esav, but the wholeness of Esav, of the ability to see the business world and bring that business world into the world of Kedusha. Bring that business world into the world of Torah, and bring that business world into a means for making Klal Yisrael, the Jewish nation, both pikrim, both sharp and able in their business reckonings, and bring it to the Torah that Hashem wanted the business reckonings to uplift. He needed the Rachel and the Leah. He needed the two of them. And when he saw Rachel at the well for the first time, he knew with a great sadness that they would not be buried together. When Rachel went out to Leah, she saw Reuven coming with the Dudaim. I think this is the Rav Hirsch also. She saw him come with the Dudaim, and she said, I'll never feel that. I'll never see a child of mine bringing that gift, because it's unconditional love of a child to a mother. It's so beautiful, Leah. You know what? I forgive you. I forgive you. And I want to do that teshuva shlema, that complete teshuva that takes all the bitterness out of my heart. You lie with Yaakov. You be with Yaakov tonight, but give me the dudaim so that I can feel what it feels like for a mother to receive from her child. And although Leah conceived a child that night, she begged Hashem, make this child a daughter, because I don't want my sister to have less than everybody else. Please, Hashem, give me a daughter. Let my sister Rachel have children like everyone else. With that, the completion of the teshuvah, the gevura that Rachel overcame, the action of giving Leah the passwords, and then the chesed, the inclusivity that she was able to garner from that feeling, from seeing the love, from seeing the chesed, from seeing how she accepted the dudaim from Reuven, and how hard it was for her to give that to her sister, but she did it. That was the complete coming together of the two, of the chesed and gevura and the emet. They wove that together between them. The chesed of Rachel, the gevura, the action of Leah, and the emet, that they wove together, the tiferet, the splendor and the majesty that these matriarchs completed in their circle, now gives us an understanding, just a peek into who these matriarchs were, their strength, their prophecy, and their ability to act in the way that they needed to complete that shlemut, that completion of Am Yisrael, from which Am Yisrael could accept everything. And with that, I thank you for listening to my share, this share. And if there are any questions, please feel free to contact me